As the rivalry in US politics between Joe Biden and Donald Trump ramps up, each of the candidates is looking to set up their high-ranking campaign teams for the 2020 American presidential election. Trump is expected to keep many of his Republican allies similar to the 2016 election, including incumbent Vice President Mike Pence, who's more effectively capable of swaying evangelical Christian, traditional conservative, and rural voting blocs. Pence is your typical career politician for the Republicans, so he also has some better relations with the establishment figures, including from his time as governor of Indiana from 2013 to 2017, lending Trump some additional credibility with the traditional Republican base voters. But Pence isn't the subject of today's video. Instead, we're talking about Joe Biden's team, as he's recently become the Democratic Party nominee for president. But we don't know who's gonna be Biden's running mate, since a presidential VP pick is arguably one of the most important and defining moments of any campaign, and it can set the tone for how the campaign's gonna be run. You could get someone who helps your cause and promotes a positive image for the campaign. Or you could have a VP running mate like Sarah Palin, who is famous for not having known the difference between North and South Korea, and refused to support her own running mate John McCain's position on stem cell research when he was running for president. So, let's check out some of Biden's potential running mates. Being a former vice president himself, Joe Biden should recognize the huge importance of making a good pick. So, prior to choosing, he's already created a tentative set of guidelines for himself. Biden has said that he'd like to contrast his running mate with himself as to increase diversity of political views. First, whereas Biden's white, he stated that he'd prefer a person of color. He's male, so he said that he'd prefer a female running mate. But he also said that they would need to be on the same page in terms of policy. So we're looking for a moderate Democrat who provides another perspective. First, let's rule out who he likely won't pick. No Bernie Sanders, since he's also an old white man from an eastern state. Additionally, their policies aren't compatible whatsoever. Very likely, it won't be Pete Buttigieg. Even if they have similar Democratic positions, Buttigieg doesn't fit the criteria he's emphasizing most, of being female. Also, no Tulsi Gabbard, since her positions are too far on the progressive wing of the Democratic Party for Biden. So, having ruled out some options, a few potential running mates immediately pop into mind. First, we have Senator Kamala Harris from California, a moderate Democrat from the other side of the country, who is a woman of color. So, that's the preliminary qualification. Additionally, before she dropped out of the Democratic primary, Harris was quite popular in the polls. So, she could bring a large voter base among somewhat liberal and centrist Democrats. She's also endorsed by senior members of the Congressional Black Caucus to be Biden's running mate. So, she has some leverage from the political establishment. But it may be difficult for her and Biden to rally progressives together, potentially leading Biden to the same fate of Hillary Clinton, who partially lost to the presidency because she didn't really inspire progressive Democrats in the United States. But nonetheless, this shouldn't overshadow Harris's qualification for vice president. displaying significant political experience both as a Californian senator and Attorney General of California. But when talking about Harris as a potential running mate pick, we do have to bring up a memorable moment from the Democratic primary debates, when she attacked Biden's past opposition to busing programs for school desegregation. She did see a rise in her polling statistics at the time, but potentially at the expense of Biden's trust. So it's definitely not a guarantee that Biden will pick her, especially when another competitor is so openly promoting herself over Harris. Recently, former minority Democratic House leader for the state of Georgia and Georgia governor candidate Stacey Abrams has been openly putting her name out there as a potential running mate for Joe Biden. Whereas Harris is taking more of a subtle approach, it's no secret that Abrams wants the spot, actively campaigning for why she should be picked, somewhat successfully given that she's now on Biden's short list of candidates for the position. She's a woman of color, a somewhat more liberal than Biden Democrat, who's also been endorsed by Bernie Sanders when she was running for governor. Therefore, she could potentially unite the moderate and progressive wings of the Democratic Party. Additionally, she was the first option that the Biden camp floated for a VP pick during the primary. So her ties with Joe Biden run quite deep. Abrams could also offer more Southern Democratic voters in more moderate Southern states such as Georgia, North Carolina, and potentially even the swing state of Florida. So she could be a good pick for Biden. But having mentioned the possibility of uniting the moderate and progressive wings of the Democratic Party, another name comes up. Elizabeth Warren was one of the more prominent candidates during the Democratic primary period, leading many to consider that she could be on the short list for the vice presidential pick. However, she is also a prominent figure in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and would likely have been Bernie Sanders' top pick for VP had he won the primary competition instead of Biden. Aside from Sanders, she is the most left-leaning member of the U.S. Senate. Due to their incompatible political leanings, it is quite unlikely that Biden would pick her as his running mate. She has also heavily attacked Joe Biden during the primary season, leading many to think that Biden wouldn't trust her with the position, as he would some other candidate. Finally, she comes from the eastern state of Massachusetts, not far from Biden's home state of Delaware, and she isn't a person of color. So, she doesn't really diversify the ticket geographically or ethnically. However, there is someone who could do at least one of those. Amy Klobuchar comes to mind as a potential running mate, who could diversify geographically since she's from Minnesota, a state which is found in the overlap between the Rust Belt that contains states like Ohio, Michigan, and more, plus the Midwest with states like Montana, North Dakota, etc. After dropping out of the primary race and endorsing Joe Biden, he proceeded to win that race over Bernie Sanders by a margin of almost 10%, which was quite surprising, since Minnesota typically leans more liberal, and was to be won by Bernie Sanders. She also refrained from criticizing Biden too heavily during the campaign and debates, so it's quite possible she has Biden's trust. But there's a slight problem. She isn't very memorable, having been a low-polling, moderate establishment Democrat. She doesn't bring much public enthusiasm to the table for a general election. Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin has many of the same pros and cons. She's from the state of Wisconsin, which Clinton lost in 2016, a state which is considered part of the Rust Belt. she could help win back states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, which were typically Democratic states until 2016, when Trump took both by a narrow margin. Additionally, she was the first openly gay senator in U.S. history, which gives her a good tie with the LGBTQ community. However, the problem is she has little to no name recognition outside of Wisconsin. Her persona would have to be built from the ground up during the campaign period, something which costs a lot of time and money. Another Tammy, who might work more easily for building a persona around, is Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth, who is an Army veteran that lost both of her legs during a helicopter crash. She's the first woman from Thailand to be elected senator in the United States, with strong ties to the Asian American community, a community which many political scientists consider to be an increasingly important group within U.S. politics. She would connect with veterans groups and can help promote a strong narrative when it comes to U.S. foreign policy regarding the Middle East, given her military experience. Admittedly, she's not from a battleground state, since Illinois is a safe Democratic region, and since she doesn't have a regional persona built in the Rust Belt more generally, she wouldn't be able to have targeted regional influence. Additionally, she's very moderate and might have trouble helping Biden reach out to the progressive wing of the party, potentially inspiring another Clinton 2016 situation. There are some more candidates as well, who could potentially be Biden's vice presidential pick. However, those were the candidates we see as the most probable. But if you'd like to see a part 2, why don't you comment below, like the video, and subscribe for future videos. Have a great day. Bye!